be interesting to talk about, and something I talk about with my sister is like how this is so stupid. Like, what was what is the difference between like people who grew up with the internet versus people who didn't grow up with the internet? Like, what is that like main like psychological? It's probably like you could write 10 books about that, but
Yeah, and even then, it's like a moving target. Like the internet 10 years ago, let alone like five
mhm.
years ago, like completely different than it is now. I feel like, yeah, attention spans are just like shrinking more and more. Like now, TikTok is like the app, and it's like very short content, ton of edits, like
Mhm.
constantly changing screen, like, and that like a version of that was before, and it just seems like we're constantly like just making content that just like massages our brain in very like shallow ways now,
Do you think
which can
that
be helpful. Like there are many uses of TikTok. Yeah.
do you think that there is a sort of net negative? No, that's not the right way to say it. Like there are people like on the one hand, like there's always this conflict between like generations where like the older generation will be like, oh, these kids are like messing up because they don't do things the way we did. It I think people like our age like remember growing up without the internet, and like when we were kids it was very social. Like playing video games was very social. It's like going to someone's house playing
Sure.
like Mario Kart, or like I remember like going on AIM was huge, like messaging and stuff on the computer,
Yeah.
but we weren't spending like our whole days on the computer when we were kids. And I think we remember what it's like to like play outside as a kid all the time, and like
Sure.
have like longer attention spans. Like, do you think that that's like it's just a similar like generational like difference, or do you think like the internet, like do you think kids now have lost something fundamental because they're like using phones and Instagram and social media at like very young ages, and like they might not ever have
Mhm.
even experienced like the pleasure of like paying attention and focusing on something for a very long period of time?
Sure. Sure. I have no clue, and I think the biggest thing too is just like the lives that someone will live, like someone who is like 10 years younger than us, like the lives they'll live are like probably going to be pretty different from the lives we live. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know. Like even now, like if someone is like spending, let's say they spend the last like 2 years on TikTok or Musically, whatever, like, and all they did was spend like, let's say 30 hours a week, right? Like consuming TikTok, but then they want to start a TikTok account. Like they're probably extremely, they really know the market. Like they really know how to make like,
Content.
they know what people would probably want to watch. Whereas like
Mm-hmm.
someone who's like spent time deep focus and doesn't spend time on TikTok, like probably not as good. I mean, I don't know. I maybe their habits now are what is gonna be beneficial in the future, but I don't know. And I think it also you have to define like what, like we have to define what defines like good in a childhood, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. My inclination is to say like it's probably not as good, and I think like our parents' generation was probably even more like you know human focused and more like I don't know a better version, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
based on the metrics we're using. But who knows? I mean, yeah, I don't even know how to like. Yeah, I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on that?
It definitely seems like we've passed a point of no return. That's for sure. Like I think
For
the
sure.
the and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm thinking about like when you were talking, what came to mind is like Jonathan Haidt in one of his books talks about how like suicide rates for like teenagers is like through the roof, and like we have data spanning at least like 100 years of that kind of thing, and like it's like a hockey stick when you like plot it out over time. And like the change I think he said happened like started happening in like 2011 when like college age students got like access to like social media on their phones, is like a
Mhm.
huge sort of like statistical analysis can like show that over time like something changed in like collective mental health in this country, and is it going to be the case, like is that going to continue moving, like is the new normal going to be way sort of less mentally healthy? But at the same time, the consciousness of like, young people right now about the importance of mental health doesn't seem to be like something like our parents generation like gave a shit about, or like talked
Sure,
about.
sure.
So yeah, it's interesting, it'll be interesting to see how these things play out, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, so the comment of like no return. Like, I think like we in China, right? They like limit video game playing to like X amount of hours a week or whatever it is. Like I think that'll be like a fascinating case study and see what the results of that are. Like, will it be beneficial? Will it be negative? Like who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think we're definitely like in crazier times, and I think
Mm-hmm.
the cycle of how quickly things changes has just like compressed even more. Like
Yeah.
even the shift from like Instagram to TikTok is like I would say they're like drastically different in terms of like the content and like yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And now, like, yeah, what came to mind when you were talking is like this concept of, kind of to tie this back to the truckers, but not exactly. Like, what happens when like the things we consume in a free world are like stronger in their influence on us than our resolve is to resist them? Um, what was that documentary, or like kind of documentary, like The Social Dilemma or something, that went out like a couple of years ago? That was, I think it was during COVID, but about like people being like so hooked to their phones, and it was like there was that guy who was like one of the ex-founders of Facebook, like Tristan
oh yes,
Harris,
yes, 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 yes,
um,
yes.
talking about like basically what we're talking about, like the impact that like social media and like cell phones have on like our mental health, our like career satisfaction, relationship satisfaction, all these things. What role does sort of like, if we're able to identify that these things are like really hard to resist, like will we ever sort of like, is there a place to like regulate them? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a very
Sure, sure.
difficult question.
I think one of the interesting things, one of the things I think is most interesting is that like if you look, or at least from what I've heard, and I know like one example is like someone from that movie, but also that guy Chamath. Like none of these executives that are working at social media companies like use social media. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
use it as like a tool to just like you know release content, but like no one is. They're not really consuming. Uh, they're not eating their own dog food, and it's like kind of scary. Like maybe it's not dog food that should be eaten. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah,
Yeah, like Zuck doesn't let his kids use like Instagram, right? Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know if it's
I
true
mean,
or
I
not,
think
but it's
there's
definitely been reported.
something shady.